Hello friends, today we're going to be talking about some of the clothing that I carried out on the Arizona Trail. Stick around. For starters, let's talk about base layers all the way on this far end. I'd start, of course, with some boxers. These are just run-of-the-mill compression shorts that I picked up at Walmart. I tried some of the performance, like Icebreaker or, oh, what's the other one everyone uses? You get the idea. Some of those really performance merino wool undergarments, and it did not work out for me. That was some of the worst chafing I had on the whole trail. The generic compression shorts, that was where it was at for me. Maybe that won't work for you. Maybe that's what just worked for me. But that was a good strong base, and once I finally switched over to just those when I was carrying that, it made hiking a lot easier for me. And just to be clear, when I'd go out for a week of my hike, so it'd be 4 to 6 days usually that I'd be out there between resupplies, and I would carry a fresh set of underwear and usually a fresh set of socks each day. And without that, it would have gotten grimy pretty quick. As long as I had the fresh like base layer, what was like really skin on skin, I really wanted to make sure that I was keeping that as fresh as I could so that I wasn't getting weird chafing or any weird fungus growing or anything like that. I've seen some things, man. But I would usually just carry 1 or 2 shirts and pants with me. Usually just 1 pair of pants. That kind of thing didn't really bother me. So I'd have, 3, 4, 5 sets of boxers. I'd sometimes recycle my socks, but I try to carry 3 or 4 pairs of that and keep 1 dedicated just for sleeping. So onto the socks, I carried Darn Tough, the merino wool socks. I know these are pretty expensive, but if you get a hole in them, they are guaranteed for life. And I could hike 30 miles in these things and I would not get a blister. I could not say the same for the really thin socks that I started with, thinking, oh, I want my feet to be able to really air out. These thick socks, they add a lot of good padding. And even if they get really soaked from a creek crossing or something like that, they dry out quick. And even hiking in them really wet, I didn't have any issues. And in the past, I have had issues with trench foot on the trail and stuff like that back in Boy Scouts, and that is not an experience you want. So it's really important to at least keep a dedicated pair of dry, clean socks for you crawling your sleeping bag with at night, just so you can minimize any risk of that. That's kind of the undergarment stuff. Onto the shirts. So I'd carry usually just 1 or 2 shirts while I was out there. And I would basically just wear 1 shirt until maybe a day or 2 before I get back to a trail town, or if I were meeting up with my parents to resupply, just so I wasn't quite as atrocious, because as I'm sure you can see from some of this B-roll I'm throwing in here, it got sweaty out there. I looked like a salt mine, and it was gross, absolutely gross. But, if you're out there by yourself and if you smell bad, it's not the end of the world, right? So that's kind of my hiking setup. I did a Columbia PFG shirt. I also switched over to some other Columbia variant. It was a bit softer than the PFG, but it definitely held a lot more of that sweat and would take longer to dry out. But I started with this big blue PFG, and I also had this, I believe it's by Salem. What you really want to look for, though, is that you have some sort of sun protection factor through your clothing, so you don't have to carry gallons and gallons of sunscreen. Your clothing is your first line of defense against the elements, and it's really, really important to make sure that you're carrying stuff that's going to work for you and not work against you. For the pants, I always had some sort of a variant of switchbacks, which means the bottoms could actually zip off, and I could turn into shorts or keep it long hiking pants. I didn't really zip them off too much, unless I was really trying to air out like in the desert. But those are definitely really good pants, and I put them through all sorts of stuff, especially in the Mazet Sal's and in the Highline Trail. It was quite a lot of overgrowth, so it was smacking bushes out of my way left and right, and I didn't get too many pulled threads on the pants or the PFG, but the softer Columbia, I'll pull it apart, but you can kind of see, like in the arms up here, there are threads that are popping out all over the place. And get you a closer look. Like it's pretty gnarly. Definitely started to come apart, but that's okay. So that's shirts, pants, compression shorts, socks. Let's talk a bit about the shoes. These are my favorite hiking shoe ever. These are the Ultra Lone Peak 4s. I hear the 4.5s are just as good though, so I'd highly, highly recommend these. Back in Scouts, wearing big, bulky hiking boots that I'm like, oh, well, this will protect me from rolling my ankle, this will protect me from rocks underneath my feet. I would get blisters every day. So for Boy Scouts, there's this high adventure camp called Philmont, where you go backpacking for 12 days. I think we did 80 miles my trek. And by the end of those 12 days, I had a blister on each toe with medical tape wrapping each toe. I remember the shower afterwards. I couldn't even get the medical tape off. It was just gross. These things, I got less than 1 blister per 100 miles. I think I got 6 blisters in the full 800 miles of the AZT, and that's by and large because of these things. They don't have a rock plate though, so that's definitely something you need to consider. I know after the Mazet Sal's, there are some chunky boulders there. My feet were so badly bruised that I had to take some time off trail, and yeah, these things don't have much padding, but they're lightweight, they're grippy, they dry quick. And to supplement that, I got some of these Superfeet green inserts. These are made with pretty high density foam. The green ones by Superfeet are the most dense, and these are the ones I use for the whole trail, and you can see they're a little worn down the heel. I'm kind of flat-footed, so that's to be expected, but this plastic plate adds a little bit of that extra cushioning where you really need it against those rocks, and that really helped make a difference for me. I love these shoes, but you also might want to consider something with a rock plate for the AZT. I think I went through 4 pairs of these things too. They just kind of fall apart out there. I mean, as you can see, these are the ones I finished in. They're starting to get a little bald, but like the sides are all torn to heck. Like my toe basically would just come out of that. Like they're not in the best shape now. But very, very comfortable shoe. I could wear that through 40 creek crossings with my darn tough socks and feel completely comfortable with hiking a good distance still. They're a really high performance shoe. Okay, so continuing on like my main hiking layer. For a hat, I use the Outdoor Research Sunrunner. And as you can see here, it has this hood that also is detachable, just like that. So you can also just be a baseball cap if you need it to air out. I didn't use that feature very much on the trail, but this thing saved me from using sunscreen. Like between this and my sun gloves, I didn't need to use sunscreen at all on the trail. There were a couple of days, like Babbitt Ranch, where there's just no shade, it is just open, and in the desert where, you know, I'd get a little pink underneath the eyes, but nothing serious, and it would resolve within a day. Like, not a serious sunburn, just a little of that reflection. A lot of people on the Arizona Trail Class of 2020 Facebook group right now are talking about, oh, how vital is it to carry an umbrella? I've never hiked with an umbrella. I've had a lot of bad luck with umbrellas and wind. I've broken a lot of them in my time, not even hiking. And I didn't want to get stuck in a situation where I was carrying around a big broken heap of metal and cloth. So I figured I'd design my clothing to serve that need for me. So between these little gloves, they're the fingerless gloves. You can put, if you sweat on these, they get really cold. It's really nice. They're called Glacier gloves. I got these off of Amazon, pretty cheap. I started with Outdoor Research sun gloves that were really good too, but they were pretty pricey, and I lost one of them before I even got down off of the Mogollon Rim. So I had to get a replacement, and those do just as well. And they actually help protect your hand a little bit for if you have hiking poles. I would get blisters kind of right in the crook of my hand here if I didn't have those. Start getting hot spots at least. So they're multi-function, and that's like the most important thing about backpacking is you want pieces of gear that can do a couple different things for you. So that was good hand protection, sun protection, and then the hat also came in clutch. I could pour water in it and cool myself down, and it kept the shade all over my body, so I didn't have to use any sort of sunscreen. So that kind of knocks it out for all these hiking pieces of gear. Oh, also sunglasses, of course. These are Bircen, B-I-R-C-E-N. Got them off of Amazon. They perform just as well as any other polarized lens that you would pay hundreds of dollars for. They're awesome, fit really well, very comfortable. I think they're more comfortable than these glasses, and they stay on my face better. If you see any of the Arizona Trail thru-hike videos I put out there that I'm just wearing my normal glasses, when I'm talking to the camera, I'm constantly just pushing them up my nose. Those things, I did not have that issue at all. I love them. I think they were $20. Would highly, highly recommend them. Okay, so now onto my warm gear. Primarily, I would leave this sort of gear in my bag until nighttime. It didn't really get that cold out there for me, and I really am a hot hiker, so when it's 40 degrees out, I am just digging that, and I am just cooking the miles, and I don't feel the need to throw on a bunch of layers because as long as I'm moving, I'm warm, and I think a lot of people will agree with me on that. So I have these Smartwool merino wool base layers that I would sleep in primarily. So my routine every night, I would get out of my gross hiking gear. I'd do wet wipe bath basically, especially if I didn't have water to use. And you're supposed to carry those out with you. Don't bury wet wipes. It's bad for the soil. A little side there. And then I'd throw on my fresh underwear for the next day. So here are these compression shorts. And then I'd bundle up with, I think these are 200 or 250 fill merino wool, or whatever the measurement is, but they're 200 or 250 ply fill. They're pretty warm, and they're just like leggings. Very good, kept me very warm, especially at night. And I'd run around camp in these, no shame, run around within some long underwear. And I had the little quarter zip, also Smartwool merino wool. This might be a 150 base layer though. Very good gear. And the really important thing about merino wool, I know it's kind of expensive in comparison, but it combines the quick drying capabilities of polyester fabrics or plastic-based fabrics and mixes that with the warm when wet qualities of wool. So it's a blend of a little bit of polyester and a little bit of elastic usually, or nylon, and then a bunch of wool. So even if this is wet, even if I sweat a bunch in my sleep or whatever, this is still going to be warm. And even if I had to wear this while I was hiking, if I gave it a chance to dry before I laid down in my sleeping bag, I'd be warm. If not, I'd still be pretty warm. So it's another one of those pieces of gear that really works for you. On top of that, I also carried a merino wool buff. So this is one of those multi-use things where, as you can see, there's a bunch of holes in it. This is the one I carried the whole trail. So you can put this around your neck. It's like an expandable turtleneck. You could also filter water through this if you got some really chunky looking water, pre-filter it with this. You can use this as shade protection, pour some water on it and cool down your carotid. That'll definitely work for you. It's one of those multi-use things. It's kind of like a bandana with a little extra to it. But I also did carry a bandana. And then lastly, for the warm wear, merino wool beanie, also by Smartwool. I love this thing. A little small for my head, especially with the fro, but this thing came in clutch and I'd highly recommend it. Smartwool is a good company. They make some really good gear. Definitely served me well, but figure out what works for you. Lastly, actually, one more thing on warm gear. This is the Mountain Hardwear Ghost Whisperer Down Puffy. And I got the hoodless version because I was a monkey and I shouldn't have done that. I was very silly with that, because that mixed with this merino wool beanie, I'd be toasty all the time. I love this thing. It's one of the lightest on the market. You definitely pay for that though with it. So if you're just getting into the sport and you're not super sure about backpacking gear, I'd recommend going to REI and looking at some of their puffies. They're only a couple ounces heavier, which I mean like 2 or 3 ounces heavier, nothing even that crazy. And it's just as warm, if not warmer. And one of the issues I ran into with this thing, sadly, when I got home, it was a little skunky because I ran around in it a lot. It started to tear a little bit up here, so the fill's starting to come out. And I actually washed it. And you're supposed to do a technical wash with this sort of stuff because it's DWR down, so it's water repellent. And that's supposed to keep it lofted even if there's a little bit of rain on it, whereas down, if it gets wet, usually it's useless, unlike the wool. So I did kind of a combination thing where I need to keep this super dry and it'll keep me warm, whereas this stuff could be a little more wet and it would still work for me. But, so I did a technical wash on it, and since then, the down has actually been super pilled up. Like you can see here, this is all really flat looking, and it's really sad. It's all just matted. I'm in contact with Mountain Hardware's warranty people. I'm trying to figure out if I can get this fixed. It's a little slow going because of COVID though, as you understand, I'm sure. This thing was really, really good before I washed it, and I kind of wish I just kept the stank on it if I knew that it was going to do that to me. And so kind of sad about that, especially because it's a pretty expensive piece of gear. But in its prime, it definitely did serve me well, and I would highly recommend this. But there are definitely cheaper options. You pay for those few more ounces shaved off there. Like, I think the REI one that's very comparable to this, I think, is $90, whereas MSRP, these things can easily go for above $250. So a little food for thought there, a little opinion piece, but it served me when it did. All right, and lastly, I got my rain gear. So these are the Frog Toggs ultralight. It's the raincoat and pants. These things are super cheap on Amazon. I think for this kit, it's it's less than $30, I'm sure. And it is the lightest, one of the lightest on the market. So that's kind of cool how cheap it is. But the fabric definitely can be torn really easily. It's not the greatest durability. It'll definitely keep the rain off you though. And it definitely doesn't hurt just to throw in your bag. It just takes up a little bit of room, as you can see. But I would not bushwhack in these Frog Toggs, to say the least. They would probably get torn all over the place. But I'm not much of a guy to hike when it's driving rain out. So if it was a little sprinkle, I wouldn't even bother. I'd just keep pushing. It's probably silly, but pros and cons. Save some time, or maybe get hypothermia. But these Frog Toggs, like if I were stuck in camp and I needed to do stuff, these would be perfect. If it was really a deluge, these would come in clutch. But in some of the more overgrown passages of the AZT, they definitely probably would have gotten destroyed, and I'm very lucky I didn't have a lot of rain. And yeah, that just about covers it for my fall loadout for the Thru-Hike. Please, just like last video, drop me some questions. Tell me what you guys want to hear about, what you're curious about, what sort of worries and concerns you have about your Thru-Hike, and I'll do my best to answer those, or at least tell you what worked for me to give you a starting place. Couple of things that I guess differ from this loadout versus a spring loadout is you kind of need to be wary about where the sun is in the sky. Obviously, in the spring, the sun is further north, and as you get further into your hike, the days are getting longer and longer. Whereas for a fall hike heading south, the sun is constantly in your face. And I mean constantly. So a little thing of sunscreen definitely doesn't hurt on top of that, on top of like my shade stuff. Also, it's really important to have your insulated equipment, like your stuff to keep you warm, really dialed in and figured out before you go out there. Because as you hike during a fall hike, the days are getting shorter and shorter. So you'll be waking up before the crack of dawn, and you'll probably be hitting camp after dark quite a few times on your hike. So it's important that you're prepared for that, and that your gear compensates accordingly, because the moment, especially up on the rim, the moment that that sun goes behind the mountains, it drops in temperature and it is frigid. There were many, many nights where I would just crawl into my sleeping bag immediately after I get it all set up because I was that cold. And as I was saying, when I do my whole switch out of my clothes, basically it's hurry up, get naked in the tent while it's freezing cold out. So that was definitely an experience that keeps the blood flowing. But yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video. Please drop me a like and hit that subscribe button. It really, really helps out the channel, helps me grow. And as I said, leave me any of the questions that you have in the comment section down below, or you can DM me over at trailtime.jake on Instagram. I am more than happy to take your questions, and I look forward to hearing from you guys. Take it easy.